Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest episode of People, Politics, and Prose, FPRI's conversations with authors about their works, their careers, and the ideas that drive them. I'm Ron Granieri, director of FPRI's Center for the Study of America and the West, and I am delighted to welcome you here today to this event, either live on Zoom or listening to and watching the recording on FPRI's YouTube page. FPRI thanks our sponsors and partners for making events like this possible. We hope that if you are not currently a sponsor, member, partner of FPRI, that you will consider becoming one after you've seen our conversation today. But in any case, it is a pleasure to have you with us. One of the more challenging aspects of being an Irish Republican is that a Republican has to be brave all the time. Brave enough to believe the truth and sometimes to act on it, despite all the pressures, threats, and inducements to do otherwise. That quotation sums up the perspective of John Crawley on his life and career as expressed in his new memoir, The Yank, whose subtitle leaves no doubt as to what he means when he talks about belief and acting. Quote, the true story of a former U.S. Marine in the Irish Republican Army. The number of provocative elements in that title offers a hint of what is to be found between the covers of this book, in which Crawley offers his insights on IRA actions and intentions from the 1970s to the Good Friday Agreement and beyond. Unsurprisingly, justifying the IRA's armed struggle and disdainful of Dublin politicians who have sought consensus and compromise with the English, Crawley is nonetheless critical of the IRA leadership as well for its political and military shortcomings. He also presents unvarnished descriptions of IRA allies in the United States, most of all, Irish gangsters, such as Boston's Whitey Bulger. We have invited John Crawley here today to discuss his book and the complex questions his life story raises. How does he justify IRA violence and his role in it? What legacy have the decades of the Troubles left for the Irish people? What lessons should one draw for the future of the Irish Republic, whichever republic that is? These questions and yours will guide us in our conversation with John Crawley. John Crawley was born in New York to Irish immigrant parents and moved to Ireland as a young teenager to attend school. Inspired there by the struggle for Irish freedom against British rule in the north of Ireland, he returned to America to receive military training in an elite Special Forces recon unit of the U.S. Marine Corps. Afterward, he returned to Ireland to volunteer for the IRA. Captured and imprisoned twice, both in Ireland and in England, he is now retired and married with a family and lives in County Monaghan, Ireland. We welcome you today to People, Politics, and Prose, John Crawley.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your invitation, Ron.
So, John, what led you to decide to write this book?
Well, originally, I actually wrote a novel, and I spent about 3 years in it, and I thought it was pretty good, to be honest, but I would say that, wouldn't I? And it dealt with a lot of issues that I deal with in the book, but from a fiction point of view. And when I was trying to get it published in the States, the American publishers were saying, your writing's okay, it's good, but you're a first-time novelist and you're not known. And they kept coming back and saying, your story, ex-Marine, Whitey Bulger, IRA, all this stuff. We want to hear your story, And they pushed quite hard in it. And I didn't really think I could really tell my story without incriminating me or anybody else. I didn't know how I could do that. But I canvassed a lot of Republicans and I put a bit of thought into it. And I did have frustrations over the way, what I believe we fought for was being misrepresented and reinterpreted. And so I put pen to paper and basically wrote the memoir, and it was published in September. Mm-hmm. And so far, it seems to be doing quite well.
How long did it take you between when you decided to actually going back to when did you start writing the novel even?
Well, I started writing the novel about 4 years ago. So I was working on that for about 3 years, but the actual memoir only took me a year because so much of the novel was actually the truth, but with names changing that I was able to extrapolate an awful lot and put it back into the memoir. Put it into the memoir, I'm sorry, so that the memoir actually only took me exactly 1 year.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to say, as I start, as we usually do here at People, Politics, and Prose, I have a lot of questions for John, but I hope you do too. And if you in the audience, if you have any questions for John Crawley, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And if you pose the questions in the Q&A feature, if you type them in, I will make sure to include them in our conversation. So please keep that in mind as a practical matter. So John, I want to come right out and say this, right? Some people are probably a little shocked at the idea of someone using Marine Corps training. You went in knowing from the beginning that
Yes.
you wanted to go back to Ireland and work for the IRA.
Yes.
You describe in the book how you even turned down various possible promotions or various other alternative assignments because you knew you were only going to stay in long enough to go back to the IRA. Did anybody ever know that's what you were planning to do besides yourself?
Absolutely not. A lot of people joke that's what I was probably going to do when I was in the Marines. I remember the first time I fired an M203 grenade launcher, and in Okinawa, I had a direct hit on a 50-gallon drum 200 yards away, and boys were cheering and saying, "Oh, you're probably going to go back and join the IRA," and all that stuff, you know. But I was saying, "No, I'm not," But because they knew I was from Ireland, because my home address was Dublin, I would often get joked about and stuff like that. But no, I never would have told anybody that or anything like that, But no, absolutely not. No, I couldn't have told anybody that. Plus, I could never be 100% sure that I would see it through until I saw it through. I mean, like I did have, opportunities. I had an opportunity to learn Chinese for the Naval Security Group, and I had an opportunity to go to Annapolis. And they were going to send me to Annapolis right there and then after advanced infantry training. But I was determined to come home and join the Republican movement. But, at the same time, until I actually did so, I could never be 100% sure I would do so. Hindsight's an easy thing, but I believe that I joined the Marines not to get professional training and to enhance my own professional development, but also to test my commitment. That I believe that, after 4 years, if I did come back and I was still committed to joining the Republican movement, that it was a serious commitment, and it ended up a serious commitment, But, it's very hard to judge these things until you actually do them.
Sure. This, of course, is exactly one of the questions that I wondered about reading the book is, an American audience would read the book, right? They're familiar, obviously, with, they may identify with you as an Irish American, as an Irishman, may feel like they understand the Irish situation, but viewed from a particular perspective, right? This is a story of how a young man becomes, for want of a better term, radicalized, right? In the sense that you decided to join the Republican movement. And I have both a general question and a specific question. So yeah. The general question is, what do you think your life story can tell us about the ways that young men make these kinds of decisions to join, and not just outside of the specific Irish experience, but when we think about young people choosing this kind of a life? Do you reflect on how you are different or similar to someone in a different country who would be also part of let's say, a similar movement or organization?
I understand completely what you're saying, Ron, but I wouldn't really agree with the term radicalized. Fair. Because I was never indoctrinated to shift my opinions from one end of a political spectrum to another. All right. I always believed in republicanism. I always believed in democracy, and that's what I was going to fight for in Ireland, to achieve, a British withdrawal from Ireland, and to achieve a national democracy within an all-Ireland republic. So, I wouldn't accept the notion or the concept that I was indoctrinated, which I wasn't, because it was my own belief systems, or nor that I was radicalized. However, I do understand somebody saying, well, you actually, you took a big step, you didn't just talk the talk, you walk the walk, and why would somebody do that?
Right.
And I'm not really sure. I'm just the type of person who, if they believe in something, finds it very difficult to sit on the sidelines and say, yeah, somebody else, you do it, and I'll sit back here and watch you from safety and cheer you on. It's just not in me to do that. And if I believe in something, I'll see it through, but I have to really believe in it. I mean, this wasn't a notional thing. This wasn't, right. When you ask about young men, I was an idealistic young man, and now I'm an idealistic old man, but what attracts idealistic young men, are idealistic concepts. You know, what you don't want, what you definitely do not want, are people motivated by adventurism, or people motivated by revenge, or some sort of ego trip. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those are. In fact, during the hunger strikes, when Bobby Sands was on hunger strike, and the other 9 men who died, the IRA actually put a moratorium on recruitment. They wouldn't allow anybody in for a period of several months because people were joining on the basis of revenge, on the basis of emotion, and you know that is not any way to sustain a commitment. You have to be committed to a political goal, and you know you have to maintain also a sense of proportion, I believe. You know what I mean? You know, it's a balance. It's a balance, and a lot of things very often are outside your control. You know, you can react one way, the enemy can react another way. That brings back you know, another response, and you know sometimes you're not just always, you know, the agent of your own personal trajectory. Things can go off on tangents, but for me personally, I did what I set out to do. I'm proud that I did it. I have no regrets. I regret how it ended politically, because it didn't end with a declaration of British intent to withdraw from Ireland. But I was never personally involved. I mean, the IRA did things that nobody could stand over. There's no question about that, as every army in the world does. But I was never personally involved in anything that I'm ashamed of, you know.
All right. Well, that gets closer to my specific question. When you talk about, so we're not going to say radicalized, but let's just say, right, there's lots of young people of Irish backgrounds may be sympathetic to the Republican cause. You go out of your way to mention, right, that usually people try to explain membership in the IRA by either saying, well, you must have gotten it from your father and your grandfather, or there was some kind of personal trauma or personal sort of vendetta that you're following. But you say none of that applies to you.
No.
And so how does one, or how did John Crawley become a Republican?
Well, I was always a Republican in the sense that, I mean, I grew up in America, went to school in America until I was 13. So, you know, we started every morning with the Pledge of Allegiance to the Republic for which it stands, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, I mean, being an American, I was a Republican. I grew up in a republic. I grew up in a country that had a democratic system, that fought the British to obtain it, that fought during the American Civil War to keep it, and had a wide range of ethnic groups, cultures, and identities, but e pluribus unum, from any one, still managed to retain or maintain an overarching loyalty to a national republic. And I felt that Ireland deserved the same, and could not have that with the British presence in Ireland. By the British presence, I mean the presence of Britain's claim to jurisdiction in Ireland. I don't mean the Unionists. I don't mean the British presence.
Well, and what did your parents think about your decision to go back to Ireland after you've been in the Marine Corps?
Well, they were already in Ireland. They
were already there. Okay.
So I came back. Right. Well, I mean, I didn't tell anybody about my Republican, you know, activities. And actually, when I was arrested the first time, about 4 years into my time in the IRA, the special branch, the Garda special branch in Dublin, when they went to my parents' house, had a real tough time convincing them it was me that they had arrested. They were saying he couldn't be in the IRA, and somebody must have stole his ID and all this. They hadn't a clue. It was an awful shock for them. I mean, I felt terribly sorry for them. You know, I really did. It was a tremendous shock. If I'd have had my way, I went to jail twice, and I believe both times. Well, I know definitely the first time was the result of an informer, and I believe the second time was too. If I'd have had my way, I would have spent my time as an IRA volunteer completely under the radar, and would never have been known, and would never have written a book. And there are people who managed to do that, but unfortunately, in my case, I was informed on, and so my involvement became a matter of public knowledge.
So your arrest is what your first arrest was what brought this to the public.
Yes.
I want to talk about your specific activities in a second, but I've got there's so many directions to go in. So I want to go with this one because you mentioned, right, that we were talking before we got started about Americans have a particular view of republicanism, and Irish Americans have a particular view of the struggle in Ireland. And what is it, if an American picks up your book, what do you think they will be surprised at, or what would you like an American to learn about the Irish Republican movement from your book?
Well, I'd like them to learn that it's not a struggle. It's not a war between Catholics and Protestants. It's not a sectarian struggle. It was a struggle for full national liberation. The Protestant Catholic sectarian dynamic was actually brought into Ireland by the British. They under the Britons' Act of Settlement, even to this day, the head of state, the monarch, cannot be a Catholic.
Right.
It's inherently sectarian. Up until about 10 years ago, they couldn't even marry a Catholic. And they brought that into Ireland, and they brought in, the thing that if you were Protestant, you got the privilege, you got the patronage, and Catholics were more or less, who were the overwhelming majority of the population, were stateless, which, and I'm not going to a big history lesson on that, but it's this dynamic that was brought in by colonialism and imperialism. It's not an inherent character fault in the Irish people that they can't get on. It is absolutely not that. And I'd like them to learn that. But I mean, I met a lot of Irish Americans over there who are very, in tune, very knowledgeable about the situation. A lot of them would have had relatives after the Irish Civil War in 1922. Thousands of IRA men who lost the Civil War to the British Armed Free State came to America. Their kids and grandkids were, in my day, still helping the Republican struggle. And of course, I think many Americans would be aware that the Irish played a very big role in the American Revolution, in the American Civil War, the Irish Brigades. I think it was Froude, a English historian, said that the Irish were the most irreconcilable and the most determined to push the quarrel to the last extremity in Washington's army, So there's very close links because America is a republic, and in Ireland we aspire to be a 32-county republic. So and republicanism is also international. The French Revolution, the French help towards the American Republic and all that. So there's an international element to it too, where there's very close links between the United States and Ireland over many years.
Yeah, well, and this, I think that you mentioned the international links, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But you used the phrase just a moment ago in your answer when you talked about losing the Civil War in 1922, and you talked about the British Armed Irish Free State.
Yeah.
Which I have to say, right, that you are pretty relentless in your criticism of those Irish politicians in Dublin who accepted partition. People will ask, and I'm going to ask it too, is at what point does one have to reconcile oneself to certain realities that it's better that there is an Ireland, an Irish Republic? I think about the historical examples of somebody like De Valera, who's one of the leaders in the Civil War, as complicated a person as he is, and he's initially an abstentionist, and then he decides to embrace the Republic in order to shape it. And one of the criticisms of I guess of your book, but also of a lot of unreconciled Republicans is, why can't you just accept that this is the best deal that we're going to get right now? And how do we, what is your response to that? Well,
it's not a simple response that I was told. For example, the setting up of the Free State and all that in 1922, had it been used as a stepping stone, I could have supported that. You know what I mean? But it wasn't. It was promised to be a stepping stone, but it actually, what happened was, the fact of the matter is that the Dublin government rapidly came to see partition as an essential mechanism of its independence. If there's a peaceful way to move forward, I think that should always be explored. There's no question about that. But sometimes I often get this question asked by Americans, and my response often would be, if America was occupied by a foreign government, right? What shade of gray would an American see that in? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't want to come across as an absolutist as somebody who is in just this pinched, narrow mental orbit that it can only be one way and no other way. I mean, I do understand the nuances and all that, but the fact of the matter is that the Irish people, you see, there was never, ever, ever need for violence in Ireland. There was never. If Britain had respected the overwhelming wishes of the Irish people as a whole at any time in our history, there would never have been violence in Ireland. I remember in the early 1990s, Sir Peter Brooke, Northern Ireland Secretary, a member of the British Cabinet, said that the British government wasn't against the concept of a sovereign Irish Republic. They were only against its violent expression. But in 1918 election, there was a totally peaceful election throughout the 32 counties of Ireland, where the Irish people voted overwhelmingly for an Irish Republic, and the British responded with partition and the Black and Tans. So we have to put things in context, and it's not just a case of being against a settlement per se, a settlement that works towards your political goals. I have no problem with that, but the danger that we're in, I think, as Republicans, is that the Good Friday Agreement, which I don't support because I support the concept of an Irish Republic, and people turn around and say, well, that's a peace process. How can you not support peace? I do support peace. I totally support the peace. And I'm not in any way advocating a return to armed struggle. But I'm critical of a process that can't lead to Republican goals, because the United Ireland envisioned under the Good Friday Agreement maintains the sectarian dynamic. It maintains the British-Irish cleavage and national loyalties. And the entire concept of Irish republicanism for the last 200 years has been to break the connection with England and to form a joint civic identity across the sectarian divide. That's basically it. As we sometimes say, republicanism in Ireland, it's very easy to understand, but it's also very easy to forget.
Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead, John. Sorry.
Oh no, I don't want to come across as dogmatic or anything like that.
All right.
I mean, but I mean, as an old Irish Republican said to me years ago, there's only two outcomes to the struggle. One is the Irish Republic, the other isn't. You know what I mean? So I want to defend Irish Republican principles and work towards them, but I'm not advocating violence or anything like that. Any violence that probably would ever come in the future would probably come from Unionists or Loyalists who would kick back against that, which is where it came from originally during the Home Rule Act and all that,
So, well, and I appreciate that that argument, and that you're certainly not talking about a return to violence.
Absolutely not.
But how do you understand your career in the IRA, which was engaged in, let's say, the planning of violence? Now, of course, we can talk about who the victims were, but this question of you were once in the violence business. You've since retired. But how did you understand what you were doing while you were doing it? And how would you explain that to someone who is critical of you now? Well,
first of all, I totally understand your question. But from my perspective, the term violence is a loaded term because it implies the illegitimate use of force. Mm-hmm. I believe our struggle against the British government was legitimate.
All right.
And that we had a right, to, I mean, let's face it, had George Washington lost, I'm not comparing myself to him, but had he lost, they'd have swung from a gibbet. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Terms like terrorism, I see as terms of, for the most part, political abuse. Mm-hmm. I mean, people who you support are freedom fighters, people who you don't are terrorists. Now, I do agree there are terrorist acts, like, for example, the deliberate killing and murder of civilians is absolutely a terrorist act, no question about that. But I justified anything I did by my belief that the British government should no longer claim jurisdiction in Ireland, and that we should have the opportunity on a national level to forge a national civic identity that cut across the sectarian divide, which has been the Republican goal since 1791 when the United Irishmen reformed. And the United Irishmen reformed exclusively about Protestants. One of the ironies of it, and I find when you hear sometimes Americans talk about the Catholic Protestant thing, the United Irishmen were formed. The Irish Republican movement was formed exclusively by Protestants, you know, in 1780. But they were Enlightenment Protestants, the Protestants of the Enlightenment, and the issues we have today with loyalists and unionists, they're Protestants of the plantation. You know, they're Protestants who see their roots in the confiscation and the sectarian supremacy that was brought about by the plantations of Ireland, by Britain, which was a deliberate act of ethnic cleansing, so that Ireland could never achieve the cohesion to build a national democracy, which to this day it hasn't. You know, I mean, there is an independent Ireland in the 26 counties. There's no question about that. It's a recognized state internationally. They're an Irish government, but they're not the government of Ireland.
So what is the place? And this is there are a couple of questions that come in from an anonymous attendee who wants to know, what is the place of the Northern Ireland Protestant Unionist community in your vision of Ireland? That this anonymous attendee is rather exercised. It says that referenda in both parts of the island voted to accept Northern Ireland within the UK in the Good Friday Agreement.
Okay.
Where should because I understand your point that it shouldn't be a sectarian struggle.
Yes.
But we're not just talking about Catholics and Protestants. We're talking about Republicans and Unionists. And so where should they be if they currently live on the same island? How should they live together politically?
Well, you know, a third of the American population during the American Revolution were Unionists. You get this in every colonial situation, every time, right? People do not want to remain loyal to the old order and don't want that changed. Unionists are a distinct community. There's no question about that, but they are not a separate nation. They're not a separate nation. And, you know, people say Unionists don't want to live in United Ireland. Unionists lived in United Ireland for hundreds of years. Ireland was united during the plantations. Ireland was united up until 1922. All the main Protestant churches in Ireland, the Methodist Church, the Anglican Church, they're all Ireland churches. The Orange Order is an all Ireland institution. So you know, the question with a lot of Unionists is not that they don't want to live in United Ireland, but they don't want to be subject to the decision of the overwhelming majority in Ireland. You know, partition was a national gerrymander carried out by the British to make a national minority a majority in an artificially constructed state. And now you talk about the democratic, you know, vote during the Good Friday Agreement. Okay, that's a valid argument. There's no question about that. But you see, that wasn't a national election. In the 6 counties, they voted for the multi-party agreement. In the 26 counties, they voted to alter Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution to more or less recognize, you know, unity can't come about until, you know, certain conditions that the British set. Now, the trouble with that is, from a Republican perspective, is yes, the people in Ireland made an electoral choice, but the decision whether to call a border poll is totally in the hands of a British Secretary of State, a member of the English Cabinet, who doesn't have a single vote in Ireland, not one vote. He decides if there's going to be a poll, the criteria, which he's never made public, who qualifies to vote, and on top of that, Westminster has the final say, because Westminster parliamentary sovereignty is still supreme in that part of Ireland. So yes, the Irish people again have made an electoral, you know, decision, but the constitutional choices and the real power still lies with the British government. Not a single Irishman, elected or otherwise, can call a border poll in Ireland. Now, you know, that's the strangest form of democracy that I've ever heard of. You know?
Well, and that gets to the question, which I also see Seth Perelman asked this question about, you know, in politics, as Bob Dole once said, that you have to know half a loaf is better than none because you'll get the other half later. Is your critique that right now the policy, the process, as it will, does not have any sense of where that other half would come from? And would you be more reconciled to the current system if there were some kind of more specific talk about the criteria that would be necessary for there to be a border vote?
Well, to an extent, but you see, the thing about it is there's all kinds of things in the mix now being suggested that, for example, maybe the rest of Ireland should rejoin the British Commonwealth in order to make unionists feel more comfortable. And there
Mm.
should still be institutional links with the Crown and things like that. You see, the whole purpose of the Irish Republican movement was to break the connection with England, not to enhance it, and not to embrace it, into the future. As a Republican, I want to see, and all Republicans that I know want to see, an independent national democracy within an all-Ireland republic, the same as you have in the United States. You look at India. India has 2.1 billion people, 2,000 ethnic groups, 15 official languages, but it's one republic. Ireland, half the population of London, two basic traditions, one a small minority, but that minority position is underwritten by a foreign government. Their supremacy is underwritten by a foreign government, and we can forge a joint national, government. I mean, and one of the ironies of it is like I said, the entire Republican philosophy and movement was started by Protestants. Mm-hmm. Before the United Irishmen were formed, I mean, most Irish patriots or rebels, or whatever you want to call them, either wanted to restore a Gaelic aristocracy or have a Catholic king on the throne. It was the enlightened Protestants of the United Irishmen who first came up with the concept of a sovereign republic within its own right. And I think that was right then. It was, and I think it's right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know any Republican who would disagree with that. They might disagree with methods and things like that, but certainly the basic concept of a fully free, sovereign, independent Ireland is the Republican goal.
Well, and of course, when the Good Friday Agreement was agreed upon, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and the United Kingdom were both members of the European Union, which also was supposed to make national borders less relevant. Yeah. And of course, the 6 counties of Northern Ireland voted against Brexit in 2016. Not quite as enthusiastically as the Scots did, but pretty significantly, of certainly a larger majority against Brexit than you had as a majority overall for Brexit. And how do you see the discussions since Brexit? How are they shaping your sense of the future of republicanism in Ireland? Because there certainly have been some folks who were saying that this may push things towards a crisis in greater direction, but we're 6 years on, and we're still arguing about the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol. Yes. And so where does Brexit fit into your understanding of the current situation?
Well, for one thing, I think it flags up the problem when you have a foreign country putting one of its borders through the middle of your country. You know what I mean? Had Ireland achieved its full independence in 1921, mm-hmm. We wouldn't have these problems. But look, it didn't, and we do. It's hard to know where the Brexit thing goes. I know they talk about the border being less visible and all that, and it is. But the fact of the matter is, it's two jurisdictions with 2 different currencies, 2 tax bases, two sovereign governments, and that constitutional issue it remains really at the heart of everything. Whatever way the Brexit thing goes, at the end of the day, the constitutional issue is really what reigns supreme. Does Irish constitutional authority reside with the Irish people, or does it reside all or in part with the British Crown? And that is the main cleavage in the conflict.
Gerald Sieber asks, with the success of Sinn Féin in the most recent Northern Ireland parliamentary elections, does this, will it really be another 100 years before unification, or does this make a difference? Does Sinn Féin's electoral success in Stormont make a difference for the future of the Republic?
No, I don't think so, because the North, basically what the Brits done in the North is they set up 2 sectarian camps and called each of them a nation. And that sectarian dynamic is so ingrained in the North that, Sinn Féin will always get the nationalists will vote for Sinn Féin, the Unionists will vote. Like, I know nationalists who don't support Sinn Féin and a lot of their policies, but tell me all the time, well, I'm going to vote for Sinn Féin because if I don't, the Unions will get in. Mm-hmm. I mean, our politics in the North is so toxic from that whole sectarian setup there. It's very hard to judge. It's very hard to judge. We need to break away from that and build a national government, I believe. and deal with it on that basis. But as long as Stormont is, as long as that sectarian duality is there, nothing's ever going to really change. And that's to the benefit of the British. That benefits the British because it keeps the place in a state of flux. It keeps them their strategic interests in Ireland intact. Their control of this massive strategic asset in the western flank. I mean, Ireland's always been a major strategic thing to them. I mean, the British are in Yemen and they're in Iraq. They're in places around the world trying to shape the strategic environment to suit them. I mean, does anybody seriously believe that they're going to just walk out of Ireland and close the door behind them? They are going to try to shape things here that will give them in the future, when eventually the demographics prove incontestable. At the minute, Unionists are only majority in 2 of the 6 counties. They're only majority in 2 of the 30. Demographics are only going away. Now, the Brits played a long game, and they're trying to shape things so that at the end of the day, I believe that they can maintain maximum control with minimum footprint in this country. And one of the things is, for example, one of the ways they'll have to do that is by insisting that Unionists, even in so-called United Ireland, will be British citizens under British protection. And there's even an argument now that they will not have to become Irish citizens in United Ireland. So, I mean, at some stage, we're going to have to forge a national government in this country, I believe, and I want to see that done peacefully. But when you have a foreign government in the mix, it's very, very difficult. I mean, the British, if you look at the American Revolution, some of the stuff, I mean, they sent over peace feelers. They tried to get moderates in the Congress. They tried to split people. They armed 25,000 Americans, joined the Royal American Rifles and joined Unionist and Loyalist militias. They're a small island who built an empire on divide and rule. They're very, very good at it. And I would never underestimate the British and their ability to counterinsurgency and their ability to infiltrate and co-opt groups and movements to dovetail with the trajectory they wanted to go on.
But I guess this gets right to the problem, and I have to say the same anonymous attendee as who's admonishing me to watch my language. I will say that the legitimate question that's being raised is, even you are describing a situation where a certain percentage of the population in Northern Ireland consider themselves, when they call themselves Unionists, when they consider themselves Unionists, right? They consider themselves part of the UK. They don't want to leave Northern Ireland, but they also don't want Northern Ireland to leave the UK. If that is indeed the case, and as whatever we want to attribute these firmly held beliefs to, if that is indeed the case, right, that is a political reality in the here and now, that there are people who would find themselves to be a small minority, perhaps, yes, in the overall island, and they would rather not have that happen. And how do you create a political settlement that will respect the let's say the very real concerns of Irish Unionists, assuming that they're not going to vanish off the face of the earth. They're not going to voluntarily. They're not going to wake up tomorrow and feel any differently. And for them, the status quo makes the most sense. If that is indeed the case, then should Republicans respect that to the point where they would focus on building a successful Irish Republic in the 26 counties that already are the Republic of Ireland?
Well, I think they've built it. I think they've built a successful republic in the 26 counties. I think it's quite successful. I mean, the 6 counties is an economic basket case. It's an absolute basket case that survives on British conscience. We talk about, the Britishness of Unionists, but in so many times it's been conditional. Even the Orange Order, when it was founded in 1795, said the Orange Order gives its loyalty to the crown so long as the monarch is a Protestant. Ian Paisley in the 70s for a while very heavily pushed the concept of UDI, like in Rhodesia, a Unionist Declaration of Independence. So, they're very often their loyalty to the crown is conditional. There's no question about that. Now, I'm not dismissing if somebody believes they're British. I'm not trying to change that. What we were trying to change, Republican, is the British government's position in Ireland, that they claim jurisdiction here. I mean, I believe what happened. There were a lot of Unionists in the South after the state was founded in 1921, 1922. After the Free State was set up, there were a huge amount of Unionists in the South. In fact, the British government was actually more closely aligned with the Anglican big landowners of the South and Eastern Ireland than they actually were with the Presbyterians in the North, more emotionally clinging, close to them and all. And they didn't suffer any adverse consequences in that. And no Republican would see. I believe in a Republican form of government. I don't believe in an ethnic monoblock setup where there's only one. You're nationalist Catholic and that. No, I believe in the concept of a civic unity across the sectarian divide. And again, many Protestants have believed that over the years too. I mean, it was a Protestants helped form the United Irishmen. Well, they helped form the Fenians. They wrote the Fenian Oath to the Republic. A Protestant. It was a Protestant who wrote a nation once again. A Protestant was the first president of the Irish Free State. So we have a partition mindset in the South. There's a strong partition mindset because of partition. And we have a unionist mindset in the North because of the Union. And quite frankly, I don't believe we'll ever have a genuine Republican outlook in Ireland until we have an Irish Republic.
That creates an interesting paradox, right? Because how do you create an Irish Republic if there is not Republican sentiment? By what procedure? And I know this is where it gets complicated, right? Because are we looking at a particular kind of peace process? If we don't have a united Republican sentiment, how can we expect to imagine a united republic? If we can't imagine a united republic because there's no Republican sentiment, should this be, what is it that people should be doing in the meantime, especially if we have, for very good reasons, put aside the notion of a violent struggle?
Well, you can say that there's no Republican sentiment, and that's what it seems like, but if you look around in Ireland, if you see a political document on a wall, it's the Proclamation of 1916. It's not the Good Friday Agreement. I mean, and if you put a couple of drinks to an Irishman, he starts singing. He's not singing about the firing squads of the Free State Army. They're singing about the IRA, even though the IRA has no real support that way. There's an underlying every Irish politician outside the Unionist camp says they're Republican, even though then they'll turn around and tell you, well, we have to leave the Republic aside and come up with all these compromises and that, in the meantime. And there's nothing wrong with compromise, but the fact of the matter is, I sort of lost my train of thought there.
Well, but that question of, so how should we then, how should we understand the sense of, what is it that people expect to have happen? And what should the Republicans who can feel very sincerely that the goal should be a united republic? When you're confronting Unionists who feel very sincerely, for very sensible reasons for themselves, that they feel that union makes more sense, and that union is something they feel strongly about, right? How do you build, or how can you even think to build any kind of a common Irish sentiment? And if you can't, this is where it gets difficult, right? If you can't imagine building that common Irish sentiment, even, notwithstanding the fact that we can have history lessons about the role of Protestants in the creation of the United Irishmen, right? If we can't have it, then is there, when do we reach the point where we have to say the status quo is where we're going to be for a while, and in the meantime we should continue speaking to each other and hope that some kind of larger consensus emerges? I don't know. I don't want to sound impossibly idealistic there, but I'll throw that out.
We should always speak to each other, of course. But you see, the thing that skews all this is that a foreign government, the British government, is underwriting the supremacy of a national minority in Ireland and turn them into an artificial majority. I mean, the northern state doesn't exist because of the moral argument that's overwhelmed the Republican argument. It's there because the British government is backing it militarily and financially, you know. And it made sense, you know, people, you know, we often say the Free State won the Civil War. The British government won the Civil War. I mean, they partitioned Ireland. The South was kept more or less at the time as an agricultural backwater that kept supplying them with food and things they needed. But what's very often not realized is that the 6 counties in the north in 1922 contained well over 93, 94% of Ireland's entire industrial manufacturing base, right? So, you know, there was a certain victory for Imperial Britain and all that. But I mean, that's all gone. That's dissipated. The place is in absolute chaos. It's a sectarian. It's just a sectarian dive, really. You know, and I don't think that anything is going to come of it while the British are in this country. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The British government. I mean, mm-hmm. I have great faith that we can build a common consensus once we don't have a foreign government in here constantly skewing constantly in the mix. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Well, then that gets.
I know I'm being a little bit inarticulate there, but
that's that. But I think that it is obviously complicated. But that gets to the question of, so what. And what an early question that I've been waiting to ask you, which was posed by a different attendee, is what do you think would have to happen for the government in Westminster, for the UK, to allow independence votes? Is there a connection with the question to allow an independence vote and a unity vote in Scotland, say, or are there Republicans in England with whom Republicans in Ireland could find allies in order to discuss the creation of better Republican institutions, right? Are there realistic prospects in any of those directions?
At the minute, I don't see any realistic prospects at the minute. But you know, the Brits have an amazing tendency to grab defeat from the jaws of victory, and you know, events come up. You know, I mean, Ireland, you know, you look at the Home Rule thing. They more or less had Ireland totally at peace, and then you know you had the Home Rule crisis, First World War in 1816. It's events that come up. Even Brexit is an event, unforeseen events very often. It's not really all the speech making in the world, all the books in the world aren't going to change. It's events, but and one event, like you said, could be perhaps the rise of an English Republican trend there. I mean, the Tories are fighting very hard against allowing another Scottish referendum. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They simply will not allow it. You know, it's a mistake to believe that the British are here defending the rights of Unionists. The British are in Ireland to, you know, they didn't set up the Northern State to defend the democratic right of Unionists. They set it up specifically to deny the democratic right of Ireland as a whole, the national self-determination. That's why they did it. And they want to maintain the political and territorial integrity of the United Kingdom. Now, when you got stuff like, you know, the SDLP in the north, the nationalists, and the Dublin government saying stuff like, "Oh, the Brits are neutral" and stuff like that, it flies so much in the face of reality that's, you know, it's very hard to it's very hard to know what to say to that. Mm-hmm. But it's very hard, Ron. You know, to be honest with you, like I'm not advocating a return to armed struggle,
right,
in any way. But I think when I wrote the book, I was just as a Republican trying to explain a Republican position from a Republican point of view. I don't speak for anybody. I'm not a member of any organization. I speak for nobody but myself, you know. But I do believe that I articulate the views of a lot of Republicans around the country because I've been doing the circuit now, and everywhere I'm going, I cannot believe the reception I'm getting, and Republicans actually thanking me for writing the book. Thank you for writing that book. You know, I can't believe how many times I've heard that. There's a deep Republican sympathy in this country, but very few people are willing to make sacrifices. You know,
well, yeah.
People want a quiet life. People want to live. They want a quiet life, and that's totally understandable. I mean, the Irish people as a whole, I mean, the Irish people in the famine, I mean, 1 million people died of starvation. There wasn't one shot fired, not one person lifted a finger to save themselves. This thing about the Irish being a fighting race is not really, I don't think it's that true, actually, But anyway.
Well, John,
I don't really have the answer there. I don't have the answer, Ron.
I will say that here at People, Politics, Prose, we're not insisting on finding the answers, but we do enjoy, and we are here to think about the big questions. And there is clearly, right, there's a very, if this were a simple problem, it would have been solved a long time ago, John, right? Absolutely. And I respect that. And I'm curious, right? You say you've been on book tours, you live in County Monaghan, so you're very close on the partition line.
Sure, yeah.
Have you had any, or do you have any events planned in the 6 counties? Are you allowed to go there?
I was in Derry.
You were in Derry.
Oh, very good, very good. Yeah, fantastic response, really good. Mm-hmm. Far more than I expected. But and again, it's very hard. It's been very heartening for me. I know republicanism in Ireland is in a very bad place right now because nobody's even talking about a republican anymore. They're talking about a united Ireland. But the Ireland they're talking about, it's not united in a republican sense because they're talking about geographical unity, but maintaining the British-Irish cleavage, maintaining that thing, and that's the antithesis of Irish republicanism. So it's very disheartening in that way. But it's great to go around the country and meet people and find out that I thought I was leading Thoreau's life of quiet desperation, yelling at the news and yelling at the screen and this ain't, and then I'm going around the country and I meet hundreds of people who are thinking the exact same way. Mm-hmm. But look, at Irish republicanism in Ireland has been down at many times. It's been almost an irrelevancy many times. But sometimes it only takes a few candles to light a lot of flames, and I think if we as Republicans keep our analysis, develop our analysis, and try to get it out there, but it's almost impossible because the mainstream press and everything here, if you're not on board the consensus, you're getting nowhere, and of course I'm sure the Irish government ran very strict censorship through the whole course of the trouble. Section 31. I mean, total, complete censorship. So it's very difficult. The concept of a free of freedom of information that isn't sacrosanct here like it would be in the United States.
And so we moved very quickly into the big political questions, and so we haven't had a chance to talk a lot about the biographical issues. But I encourage people to read the book. But I do want to ask you this question that I should have gotten to earlier, and that is, you describe, you have very eloquent, very interesting descriptions of your experiences in the United States, especially working with Whitey Bulger and his friends in Boston, and the fact that you and that the IRA as an organization had to work with people like that, and that you were working, as I work with people like Muammar Gaddafi in order to get access to weapons for the IRA. Was there ever a moment where you were thinking that, is this struggle worth it if we have to work with people like this?
Well, I didn't, the thing with Gaddafi, I mean, I wasn't involved in setting that up. We were going to try the stuff over, but I'd have been happy to get it, to be honest with you. Needs must is when the devil drives, as they say, and the Whitey Bulger thing, I mean, all the books about him and all the movies about him, we know the nefarious things he was at, but I understood the man was involved in organized crime because he was getting weapons and that, but the stuff we read about now that he was doing, the murders he was doing, pulling people's teeth out, burying them in the base, like he wasn't telling us that. He was telling us that he was more or less gambling, things like that, and he was making out more or less he was a hero in South Boston, that he kept drugs out of South Boston, things like that. So I mean, look at the United States naval intelligence had to work with Lucky Luciano on the docks, and in the Second World War, and in Sicily during the invasions, they worked with the mafia. Look at Colonel Oliver North supplying weapons to Iran to fund the Contras. I mean, because you get weapons from somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that you you agree with the people you're getting them from. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the real world politic of it is you would probably, if you need stuff for to fight a war, you're going to get it from nearly, well, not anywhere, but most people would accept weapons if they need them.
Right.
So no, I didn't honestly answer your question. I didn't think too much of the morality of that, because I felt that we had a higher moral purpose in fighting for freedom and independence of Ireland, and I thought that trumped other issues like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that I would agree with Ivy doing anything, because I certainly would not. But to me, that wasn't. It's complicated. I mean, who would argue with the rightness of the American soldiers in Omaha Beach, going up against Nazi Germany, and yet 20,000 French civilians were killed in American bombing during the Normandy campaign. I mean, life just isn't black and white, and I was a small cog in a wheel, and but like I said, I'm not going to backtrack. I'm proud of what I did. My only regret is that we didn't accomplish our goal of a British government withdrawal from Ireland and the establishment of a 32-county Irish Republic. I hope that'll come, and I do hope it comes peacefully.
Well, we can certainly hope. So what is next? What is next for you?
Well, I don't really know, because you see, I never wrote a book before, and I didn't know, how it would pan out. But actually, it's going very well. So I'll probably write something else. I'm 65 now. I mean, what the hell else am I going to do, really? I really don't know. I'm sort of that. I think that's probably what I'll do. I'll write something else, or maybe finish that novel or something. Yeah.
We see, and maybe now if after you've been successful as an author, people will be more interested in that novel. Although you'll have to make up new stories, though.
Yeah, I will. That's the only thing. Well, there's a lot of stories out there. I can. Yeah.
I mean, this is, and I want to say, John, thank you for being here for this conversation, right? I knew that bringing you in to talk about this book, right? We obviously can't cover everything, right? The moral and the political challenges connected to the Irish question. I see one last question from Mark Halpin about asking whether you think sectarianism has gotten worse of late when we talk about the division.
Absolutely, it's got worse. There's more peace walls. There's far more peace walls now in Belfast than there were during the Troubles. That whole sectarian dynamic is just toxic. And as a Republican, I want to see an end to that. And I believe the only way that can end is in a national government, that ignores the Protestant Catholic divide and just treats everybody as citizen. That's the Republican position, and I still believe in it, I'm afraid.
Well, one can believe for peace in Ireland, and for a peace that can bring together communities that have been held apart and that are holding themselves apart from each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one way to attain that peace is to do it between the Irish people, without any foreign interference. I think that's my opinion.
That's your opinion. Well, we'll leave it. We'll have to leave it there. But John Crawley, thank you for being here for this conversation. I do appreciate you for sharing your thoughts with us here on People, Politics, and Prose. And I thank all of you for joining us, right, for this difficult conversation, right? We have difficult conversations at FPRI. We talk about complicated questions because we understand that the world is indeed very complicated, and that greater discussion in as many directions as possible is how we can develop a better understanding, and we hope can move towards better political outcomes. I have to add at the end of this conversation that in addition to being the director of FPRI Center for the Study of the American in the West, I'm also a professor of history at the U.S. Army War College. But my opinions, or opinions that you may have gleaned from anything that I've said today, are entirely my own. They do not reflect those of the United States government, the United States Army, or anybody else for that matter, or even of FPRI, because here at FPRI, we are an organization committed to nonpartisan academic understanding of the world in which we live. And so if you think this kind of conversation is worthwhile, we strongly urge you to consider becoming a member, partner, supporter of FPRI so that we can have many more conversations like the one you have just heard. We'd like to thank all of our current members for their support for all this. And today's conversation is just the beginning. the world goes on, and we will be here to discuss it at FPRI. If you have enjoyed our conversation today, please tell a friend and bring a friend next time while we gather to analyze our complex world. To keep up with future episodes of People, Politics, and Prose and other events at FPRI, visit our website, fpri.org, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. You can follow the host of this program on Twitter at Ronald Granieri. Thanks for everybody for joining us. Until next time, for all of us at FPRI, I'm Ron Granieri.